Mark's parents took a vacation and they went to a nature reserve as a family. They stayed in a big, beautiful hotel and rented a big room on the third floor. A mountain river flowed nearby, and the hotel guests could fish there and rest on the shore. Mark stayed at the hotel for the last 2 days, as he had a severe headache for some reason. The view from the balcony was great, and he saw his dad standing by the beach and fishing. They laughed and waved at each other. Mark saw something in the thick forest that was growing right behind them. There was someone standing between the trees. Someone very tall, thin, and faceless. Mark had screamed and waved. His parents saw it and immediately ran to him. When they asked what happened, Mark told them what he saw. Mom said he just overheated and his eyes played tricks on him, but his dad looked at him strangely. In the evening, he came to his son and asked what he had seen. Mark said he wouldn't believe it, but his dad insisted. He gave Mark the paper and asked him to draw this man. His dad looked at him for a while. And then, suddenly, he said that tomorrow they were going away from this place. Mark couldn't sleep for a long time at night. He always felt like someone was looking at him. It was standing outside the window, and long hands reached out to Mark. He was laying on the bed and couldn't say a thing. Mark was paralyzed and heard some creepy voice in his head.
Stay still.
His hands almost reached him as someone turned on the lights in the Mark's room. It was his dad. He had a baseball bat in one hand, and he was holding the door in the other. The hands from the window were gone. Then, Mark passed out. He woke up in the car on the road. They were on their way home. Dad saved him. Already at home, his dad got a folder with old documents, photos, and his drawings. And he showed him a picture of him standing there with some little girl.
That's my sister. She disappeared when she was 8 years old. I didn't tell you anything about her.
But how did she go missing? Who did this?
Here, this was drawn by my sister, just the day before she went missing. This is a story about a young man who was coming back home late from work.
Huh? What is it? The power's off again.
What? I'm exhausted. I'm seeing things, I guess. It's pitch dark. And the elevator is probably not working. He had to make his way up the old stairs to the top 9th floor.
A little bit more, and there will be my floor. What the hell? Who is that? What the... Where's the top floor? You have no idea how excited Ethan Wilson was when he got the job. On Monday, it was his orientation day, and he was in a great mood. The head of this office seemed a little strange to him, but is it an excuse to give up this job? And it's unlikely that Ethan will see him again. He was shown his workplace, and Ethan heartily started reviewing the reports. In the early days, he paid little attention to the office stuff. But then, he noticed that they were all weird, silent, working all the time, barely talking to each other. Then Ethan decided not to pay attention to it, just to do his job. For the amount of money that he was promised, he could stand it. One day, he noticed a stain on the wall, a black spot. He tried rubbing it with his finger, but it didn't work. And as usual, staying late at work, he smeared it with paint of the same color. Satisfied with his work, he went home. The next day, there was a lot of work to do as well, and Ethan started reviewing the reports as usual. Out of the corner of his eye, he noticed a stain on the wall, the one he smeared last night, only now it was bigger. Every time he painted it, covered it with paper, hanged the paintings over it, it only got bigger with a vengeance. One day, Ethan stayed late at work. There was a lot of unopened paperwork left. He took another look at that black spot. My parents owned a property in the old part of the town. When I became a student, I moved there and lived by myself, and the university was nearby. I went there on foot. My parents inherited the home site from my grandfather, who lived there all his life. The old house was demolished, and a new brick house was built. That's where I settled in. It was very hot this summer, and I often slept with the windows open at night. I hardly ever closed the door, And at one of these nights, I laid down by the window as usual. In the middle of the night, I was awakened by creepy woman's laughter. It gave me the creeps, but having overcame my fear, I looked out of the window. There was a woman standing by the fence, hugely tall. She wore odd clothes, in some places in shreds, and her hands hung almost to her knees. Her hair was all over her face, but I could see it. She had little white eyes, and her face was terribly distorted. She stood there with that scary face and just laughed. And then, suddenly, she looked at me. I was terrified and closed the window. Then, she or it moved towards the house door. And only then did I realize that the door was not locked at all. I jumped out of bed and ran to the hall. The door handle was already spinning from side to side. I hit the door with my whole body and latched it. Someone was standing outside the door trying to get in. And then there was this horrible laugh again. I looked through the peephole. There was no one there anymore. It was not until later that I learned from my father that a long time ago, when this part of the city used to be a village, there was an unusually tall girl with a lack of intelligence. At that time, they were considered children of devilry, and no one talked to her. So, she'd lived alone for almost 60 years, until she went crazy. Mark came to visit his friend Leo. There was nothing to do, and they decided to play hide and seek. The first person to seek was Leo, so he started counting to 20. And Mark started looking for a place to hide well. In one of the rooms, he noticed an old lady sitting and watching TV. Mark was more scared by the fact that the TV wasn't working. It was just static. He felt a bit like fish out of water and decided to look for another place to hide. Unfortunately, the apartment was not so big, and there were no place to hide from Leo. He must have known his own room inside out, and Mark decided to take a chance and hide in the old lady's room. She was still sitting there, watching the TV off. It got scary. But then Mark realized the old lady just had fallen asleep. He crept under the bed and waited. Then he got a little distracted and looked back at the chair with the woman. She was no longer there. Fear hung upon Mark, and he couldn't get out from under the bed. He was so terrified. Now he was waiting for Leo to come in here. Seconds seemed like forever. At one point, Leo came in and asked if Grandma had seen Mark, his friend. Before Mark could say a word, the old lady said there was nobody in the room but her and locked the door right away. Then she sat on the bed for a long time, breathing eerily and muttering something under her breath. Mark thought he should wait until she fell asleep and get out of here soon. The old lady lifted her legs up on the bed. He thought it was 5 to 10 minutes left to wait and he could get out of here. Mark decided to look out. Leo ran into the room and took his frightened friend out. The old lady sat on the bed and laughed wildly. Then he said that his grandmother had not been herself lately, and it was better not to go into her room. I'm going to tell you a story that happened to my friend 2 years ago. It was the weekend, and she was going to go out with her friend Dolly to the countryside to have a rest. But Dolly left something at her office, and since her work was on the way, they decided to stop by. The office was located in an old building of a former weaving mill. It was 3-story. I don't know what was in the first 2. They were always closed. The office units were on the 3rd, top floor. On Sunday, there was no one in the office, and they took the keys at the security desk and went up the stairs. Dolly unlocked the iron front door, and they got into her office. They found themselves in a small hallway, where the doors of several offices and the restroom door opened into. And then the hallway went into a narrower one, with a few more doors and a passage to the production room. Quickly finding what she needed in her department, she asked to wait and went to the restroom. "Do it quick, I need to as well," my friend muttered, and waited for her in the dark of the hall. I don't know why, but they didn't turn on the hallway lights. Maybe they were hoping to make it quick, or she didn't know where the switch was. The only light source was a strip of electrical light coming from underneath the restroom door and the closed doors in the hallway. She kept on waiting. Suddenly, the handle of one of the doors right in front of her began to twitch furiously from the other side. It felt like someone was trying to get out. The hairs on the back of her neck bristled. She knew they must have been alone there because it was them who opened the office. With a weird voice, she yelled at her friend to get out quickly or let her in. There was somebody there. The door stopped twitching. Her annoyed friend came out of the restroom and listened skeptically to her and said that it was probably wind. There must be a window open, and saying these words she wanted to check if the door was open. But the cranky door started twitching again like it was being pulled from the other side. With the squealing, they rushed to the dark staircase. As soon as they closed the iron office door and turned the key in the lock, there was a hit. Then there was more and more, strong thuds like someone was kicking on the door. They almost broke their legs as they ran downstairs. Dolly's hands were shaking while she was returning the key. "Did you hear that? Chris, our driver, is dead," regretfully said security guard. "He went missing 2 days ago and was found dead at home. He lived alone." Dolly got in the car being very pale. "That office," she said. "That's where the driver always hanged around." My grandfather was an avid hunter in his day. One day, something happened to him. I'll tell you this story the way I remember it. It was in the summer. My grandfather, then a man in his prime, went to the forest for hunting. All the places nearby were familiar and walked by, so my grandfather went to the wilderness, closer to the mountains, where ordinary hunters wouldn't normally go. On his way to the forest, he found many broken trees, wool on the branches, and someone's traces. He was glad to finally get on the bear's track, but the tracks weren't bears, and not human. There's no human being as big as that, and the bear's paw is different. Evening was approaching, and he had to look for a place to sleep. He found a big old spruce, one branch of which covered safely from the rain and wind. Having dragged dead wood and twigs there and spread a couple of sweaters, he lit a fire nearby to warm the canned food. Evening was upon him. That's when he heard the crunch of twigs. Someone or something was walking around his camp. But perhaps because of fire, it didn't come any closer or show up. Grandfather stayed up all night, and that something wandered around in circles. The fire had to be banked up until sunrise. As soon as morning dawned, my grandfather decided to go to the wintering camp, which is closer to the mountain. There's no way he was coming back home without meat, and it would be safer to sleep there, and perhaps this beast would get away from him, and he would be able to hunt in peace. Wintering camp is a hut where a lost traveler or hunter could warm up in winter, eat, and sleep over. Such huts had often been built before. He got there closer to the evening, and all the way someone was chasing him, but for some reason it didn't touch him. He locked the door behind him and lighted the iron furnace to warm the food. He didn't touch his store of food. He had canned food with him. When he ate, he lay down on the bench, spread his sweater on it, and quickly fell asleep. At night, some noise woke him up. Someone was trying to open the door. But the door was secure, oak. He took the shotgun and lit a candle. Nothing could be seen, but the sound of heavy footsteps could be heard from the outside. Someone passed by the window. Grandfather pointed the gun to the 6-inch window. He looked into the darkness of the night forest. A gunshot. The gun went off and lit up everything for a moment. Grandfather even managed to discern the muzzle of someone who tried to get into the hut and eat fresh meat. After the gunshot, grandfather heard a long howl. He thought the beast was badly wounded and it wouldn't be hard to kill it. He ran out of the hut, literally in what he was wearing, with a gun, a flashlight, and a box of shells in his back pocket. He saw something big and shaggy running into the forest and rushed after it. He ran after him for a long time. He fired again, and then, blinded by a flash of gunfire, he didn't notice a snack sticking out and fell down. The hunters heard the shots and realized that something terrible was going on and someone was in trouble. 4 people with dogs went there. Maybe that's what saved grandfather's life. Dogs barking scared away the forest creature, and they found grandfather unconscious, lying near a tree. He told us that he had fired at least 5 shots with a gun, almost at point-blank range. And then the beast knocked him senseless. And the reminder of those days is the scar left by the creature. It happened back in 1993. A young couple went on a picnic in the woods to outrun their boring urban life. Now, there were trees, mountains, and clean air all around. They had been walking the forest path for almost 2 hours, and it was a surprise to Mary when she saw something like a lantern or city pillar in the middle of the forest, on the tops of the trees. She immediately called Tom to take a look too. But when he looked there was nothing like it anymore. No pillar, no sign of civilization, which is what Tom then said. After a little confusion, Thomas and Mary moved ahead. Apparently, Mary was exhausted, and they had to find a place to sleep. After a quick dinner, they went to bed. The forest silence seemed like a fantasy to them, compared to the city at night. The sounds of crickets, rustling of leaves, and howling of wind at the tops of the trees did not disturb them at all, but even somehow calmed and adjusted them to a strong and healthy sleep. Suddenly, in silence they heard a sound. The sound of some kind of receiver or loudspeaker. The sound was very loud. A set of some meaningless signals and words. Thomas thought that it might be some tourist with a loud stereo system. Then they heard footsteps. Loud footsteps right next to their tent. The crunch of branches and tree trunks gave an idea how huge this creature is. Thomas and Mary held their breath. Something stopped near their tent. Suddenly, a huge ashy red hand, more like some kind of a flail, flew into the tent and grabbed Mary. At the same moment, she was pulled out of the tent and taken out into the dark of the night forest. Thomas didn't even know what happened at first, because it all happened so quickly. When he left the tent, he called Mary by her name, but nothing was heard or seen. The flashlight barely penetrated the thickness of the night forest mist and moved from side to side through the trunks of the sleeping trees. Suddenly, he noticed something. It wasn't a tree. Something huge was standing 200 feet away, not moving at all. Then, it went sharply in his direction. It grabbed his body, squeezed him so he couldn't breathe. Again, he heard the horrible sound of the siren and some of the voices from the radio. The creature began to lift him to the great heights, and then he saw what it was. It was an ordinary autumn evening. The maintenance service office was about to be closed for the night. A strange-looking subject came up to the door. Andy, a young service worker, was snoring in his chair when suddenly he was awakened by the sound of footsteps of an approaching man. A strange-looking man approached him and handed a black laptop, quite old and shabby.
It needs the glass replacement and the webcam check.
Since the office was already closing, Andy had to take on a job home. Moreover, the wanderer paid very generously for it. The job was easy, and Andy got it done in 10 minutes. All he had to do was check the camera. Everything was working. Andy was about to turn off the laptop and go to bed when suddenly, on the laptop screen, he saw the door behind his back open slightly. He turned around. The actual door behind him was closed and not moving. But on the screen, it was still open, and now a skinny, bony hand showed up. Then, an old lady's ugly, crooked face came out. Turning around, he saw that the door behind his back was closed the whole time. What kind of a laptop is this? He decided to close it. Lisa was in her apartment looking through job ads. She had been without any income for 2 months, and the bills kept coming, so it was urgent to find a job. She saw a babysitter part-time job ad on the internet. It said that it was necessary to look after 2 babies. The payment was tolerable, so Lisa called. The phone was answered by some old woman, and she said that she was really looking for a babysitter, and then invited her to meet each other. The address of the house didn't confuse Lisa. She really needed a job. It was a single house on the outskirts of the city. The next day, she went to see the mistress of the house and the mother of these 2 babies. As she drove up to the house, she was surprised by its neglect. The house gate was hanging on rusty hooks, and some of the windows were broken. Lisa felt uncomfortable, but she decided that once she'd gotten here, she'd wondered all the details. Maybe it wasn't that bad. She was about to knock on the old door, but the door opened itself, and behind it there was a tall, skinny old woman in her 80s. She invited her in with a gesture, and Lisa walked in. They went into the living room. What a surprise it was for her when this old, strict, and pretty creepy woman told her that it was her who had placed the ad, and it was her children who needed to be looked after. Lisa did not have time to ask anything, as the old woman took her by her cold hand and dragged her along somewhere deep inside the house. As they walked down the hall, Lisa saw a lot of old photos. They walked past all the rooms, the children's bedroom, the playroom, the living room, but kept on going until they went out in the backyard. Lisa began to worry about herself and got goosebumps all over her skin. She pulled away her hand. I want you to meet the children. Isn't that what you came here, Lisa? The woman suddenly told her. Here, this is Mark and this is Annette. They are very friendly kids. And she pointed to the old oak, but there wasn't anybody by the oak, except a lot of new toys. Lisa realized there was something wrong with the woman. The old lady was not okay, and she needed to get out of here now. Wait, where are you going? I haven't shown you your workplace. There, she pointed to the strange bumps and bushes. Lisa looked over that place. 2 bumps turned out to be old graves, very tiny in size. The 2 tombstones had inscriptions on them, Mark and Annette. To look after my children, you have to be with them, right? And this is your new workplace.